make sure you don't have to do a type of
Yes.
and then you have to actually create your own type of page.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what it's like. I didn't really care. But I only did one sometimes. For the most part, yeah. You perfectly move towards, yeah.
Great.
But it was a good refresher for me too.
Yeah.
Especially when I was doing back in school this summer. I was writing research papers and had no idea how to do it.
Yeah. I took an anthropology intro course just to focus.
Yeah.
And we have to do like an APA, like 2-page paper, pretty much every week. Like, I'm not like, these, I just did that. It was like, all of these, like every tiny little thing that she could document, she would. Just like, okay. I mean, I've learned, right? Like,
Yeah.
you got to do it right. Cool. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. And then there was a time when I was I guess it wasn't that way if you like to get it was, I don't know, it was like the Monday I was or whatever, the next couple years, she was like, I didn't know about it, and then like, I don't know, gosh, it was way farther than I thought. I was like, it's okay, or the change, extra credit.
Right.
What's killing me with courage is the just because I had a writing lesson and I got confident in going to a writing nursing and I was almost handed it again. I think she just said if you just move like contribution.
I wonder, because I'm like, my job
I love your topic.
stretch. But I mean, if you use this,
I just got it.
Yeah.
you're really good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
love that
she's really
I did it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, for the most part, it's a good treat. Like, get through the course.
Yeah. And I don't think there's an instructor. She really does want us to do that.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, see, she teaches like, it would be good to start like you were having like building up your
But I have others. I have like other people like talking.
Yeah, I mean, I've got so 2 years into me now, right?
So I know, yeah. Yeah, I might start applying for some positions that are open because I need to make some. I applied at the it's just totally
Yeah.
and it's like tricky.
Yeah.
But the research is
Yeah, for sure.
I need to meet. I'm taking psychology of artists. Yeah, it's one of not really artists.
Okay.
It's one of the
Oh, okay, cool.
and the teacher for that one was her other person who comes to graduate school support. And he's a very interesting guy. He's very, like, out is the word I would use. He's pretty old. He's a little bit, like weird, hippie. But I like him. So I'm like, I want to work with him. Because I have two like, targets. And one I feel really strongly about, but it's weird. So it's like, what do I need to be doing specifically for this? But I think he's yeah, and I'm pretty sure because I like love math, but it's one of my weakest subjects, and I don't really want to lose that.
I think one of you there just there. Just because the edges don't get, yeah, that's
Okay,
perfect.
great.
Let's do it. That sounds great.
Are you still looking at it?
Probably, yeah. I haven't looked at like the exact. I'm shooting for 15 minutes. So it might be a lot of moving parts to organize, but we'll see. Yeah.
I'm just scared that
Yeah.
I mean, I could really get it.
Cool. What about DU?
I just, all of my friends have been there for the best. And my friend that got her master's there.
Cool. Also.
It's really kind of,
Yeah.
but also,
Yeah, that's kind of like and then the one that I'm excited about, but it's more of a like people University of Florida that does the clinical psychology instead of social work. Because I was pretty dead set in social work. Like an second drug.
yeah.
But I really, really enjoy all of the psychology stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard university, so I have to like focus like that. As a psychologist, Yeah.
Y'all are welcome to help yourselves to some bagels now.
Even here, I'm enjoying this. Teacher,
Jason, harder with that
I was actually like, I get there. How's your EP essay going? Yeah. Well, that's nice. I can't remember when I signed up to do it. I'm sure I put it somewhere. But I'm just planning to turn it in next week, I guess. But my original was to do I sent him a picture. Yeah. But
So for you to, I think it's sitting right there. So, it's on one of your
yeah, but it's like no.
I'm allowed to talk.
So yeah, that's great. Actually, Judy, if you don't mind sitting like over there, we just wanted to spread you out a little bit, so you know, to encourage more engagement. That's great for you. That's just fine.
This is good.
That's great. That's great.
show and tell.
Okay.
Oh, great.
Looks like you said there's
Yeah.
a few other people.
Is your
I do American Land.
Okay.
I just did a book called Newsway Handbook of Contemporary American Poetry. So I do a lot of poetry, but then I do children. I was on I used to do that. I never get to do it anymore. That's okay. For somebody who's out if they're good.
I mean, I had never had a problem with anybody. Just really.
I used to do everything. I mean, in the news department, it's weird how things work because it changes. So before Vinny Couture, I used to do a lot of film. So I did Hitchcock, I did silent film. I did a Woody Allen class, I think I mentioned that.
you did. Oh my god.
Yeah. I did the capstone film theory. What do you get to teach these days?
In the English department, I only get to teach black and writers in the summer. But during fall spring semesters, they won't allow. The cross listing is not.
Did you not see the call when we did Sharkas and did that position? You just never saw that?
I know it was your, well, I know she started, gosh, it was on APD.
Right, but
Yeah.
I was doing one or two other people. So much in this department. I keep
Yeah, David's doing it.
Yeah, David didn't like
He didn't want to.
I get really. Let's make it first. I'm Jewish, but that doesn't show up on. Most people don't identify it as, unless I tell them, and even then, different opinions. If I wore a yarmulke, I would get beaten once in a while. Then I would be the
Depending on what part of Colorado I was living.
I did it. I used to do Jewish youth work back in the day, and I would wear a yarmulke and go to things. I got both the Bible Semites and the anti-Semites, and then I had a mezuzah in Riverside, California. And one time, that's where I did my PhD. I had not put it to work. And so she said, "What is that thing on the wall?"
On the other side.
I never. Really close.
Yeah.
And also, there were a lot of them. I thought, oh, and I said, that's amazing. But then it was just really interesting. But it was, I thought, oh no, really, this is, so when it comes and goes, mostly I pass. When I'm told on the podcast,
Oh yeah, my house came in Colorado. We talked about this. My husband's like, keyword way back. But it's 20
my dad.
So we have different conversations.
Yeah. Well, there's that interesting essay by she was in the CR. She's a professor in the CR. She's white. Her essay.
Yeah.
That about weather with her kids. I think that's a great essay. Just in general, she's really interesting.
Yeah, I really like a lot of her work. Yeah. That was like a different specialty.
So she was in, she was in
Yeah, I got it Boulder.
Have you heard like has like just one thing? The problem is we need to grow the
Because what would you, what kind of doing
it's like a weird catch-22.
Well, and I feel like there were classes, because I started at Google, and then I hired on my daughter.
So I remember this because I remember saying,
So Thursday. is
But I, you know, I really got, hooked, like, like martial arts. So I did go. And
Oh,
as a
you did
student,
do-
I did like after I got
So that's taking a
primarily English degrees, like go on to master's and
Who were your
PhD.
professors?
Professor Ben.
Oh, okay. I remember
That's
she was here right when I came.
but
Yeah, she just retired. One of the reasons I did come back here was able to here and that's where I was so when she retired, it was a big honor, but it was, but 2020 changed, like a lot of lectures, and I was technically like
I was wondering if
for the degree, for 2 years, but now I'm back.
Well, let's do something like this. Let's do like a round table or a talk about something. Maybe share
I'm sure you've all seen that the bagels are everybody's welcome.
We could think like
I just want
brainstorm
to get started and just
Yeah, and you know, one of the plugs, right now, I didn't say, I did one of my stats. So sophomore school, I wanted to teach English coaches. I paid more to sit like.
It's very territorial. They really think that they own. They really think they own. This is a problem in general. We had our underage history class and we really experienced. But two premise and you can't have that. That's insane. But it's hard because we let her down out of the show. Actually stop it. There's whole classes. It's just like English skills from an ethics standpoint. I do. I have one department anyway, so you go to undergrad and
I feel like English teachers,
so I have some of it. Yeah, but it doesn't always make some I'm sure I'll get it.
I mean,
Right.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
But I do like that sound.
How was that?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And that's so I'm in this position.
It just seems like.
Well, she won't.
And then summer is
It's like
if I'm doing like graduating
argue that the summer I wanted to live in I want to be an American. And she wanted to know we don't have anybody to teach that. Well, that's fine. So they can teach it better. Or she has these not really Americans who grew up on the reservation.
Yeah.
So, but there's some
So I'm like a little, but
it wasn't
you have
20
to
years
have
ago, but diversity is more complex. I'm not African American isn't one of the central literaries of America. It is, but
I appreciate it.
it's kind of odd to work. We've had arguments shared about this. It's just not healthy. We've got to be picking each other up. Like, you're never appreciated because I try to get over
Bill, does most of your classes seem like they're here?
She's very
I think I'm gonna have to ask people to move just so the video is
my theory is if we work all we grow
I mean, it's so easier for conversation.
we are like no
I think it'll work.
she's against it. What else? That's the one place that you guys are there. When everybody's excited, that's what they take. So let's just let everybody knows them and they'll make it up. So I don't think she was happy with that anti-racist chick.
I realized I'm not gonna have
But I like that.
I'm not gonna have a watch.
That's just, you know,
to time y'all.
That was not her fault.
I have one, and I have a class, so I was like,
Just trying to have like intro statements.
oh,
Make sure they stay like about 5 minutes.
I can keep it on. I am not doing it. I'll be fine for myself. I'm not quite positioned to flag these two. But I want some to lead them.
I guess I can do that right now, and then I can leave. Hey, I realize all my devices are being used, so I can't do a 5-minute warning. But when it's 5 minutes, just keep it to 1 or 2 more minutes.
Just wait.
Right, so I have to watch Kate, and then Kate will time you, and then I'll wave at you.
I can turn on my timer.
Okay.
That works too, but that works for both.
Hey Siri, can you turn on my timer?
Yeah, I mean, if we're about ready, also.
Hey Siri, can you turn on my stop?
I'm going to do a short intro, and then of course introduce yourselves, your favorite band books.
Hey Siri, can you use my stopwatch? Hey Siri, can you use my stopwatch? Hey Siri. Oh well. Hey Siri, can you use my stopwatch? So I'm going to ask her.
And I like constant, like, I should be
All of a sudden.
like, the reason you're doing this is so that you can get jobs
Right, Kate?
Are you going first?
We'll let Kate go first. 12:20.
Alright, everybody. Welcome to our discussion today on banned books and censorship. This is Solid. He's going to tell you about what's behind you over here.
Hi, I'm Solomon Clucky. I'm a collection development librarian with your library. I helped create the banned books display back here with input from the One Book Committee and along with the instructors that are involved with this panel discussion. Feel free to check out the books. I will be back here if you're wanting to check out the books for longer. These books will be going back to the area library for display for the entire month of October if you're wanting to see any of the books.
Thanks so much. So I'm Gabriel. I'm Assistant Director of the Denver Project Frequency Inquiry. We partner with the area library as well as the One Book, One Project to Transform group to put today's discussion on. So welcome. We're going to have 3 professors introduce themselves and then just have an open discussion. Go ahead and raise your hands and we'll select you for comments. Try to speak up so everybody in the room can hear you. And those of you online, if you want to ask a question, you can type it into the chat and I can show that for you. So welcome, everybody enjoy, and I guess we'll start with Kate.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for being here. My name is Kate Schmidt. I'm an assistant professor of philosophy. And so I teach computer ethics and medical ethics, among other things. And I got really interested in banned books because both of those topics are really about sort of free dissemination of information. And especially with like social media and technology, the question of censorship comes up a lot. So I was really startled to learn that the number of banned books has been dramatically increasing in the last 5 years. I just feel like it's something that we should all be talking about and should be concerned with. I'm also a huge reader, so I love fiction, and I think it's a really nice way to put yourself in kind of someone else's shoes, which as an ethicist can be really revealing, and I think really help you understand what someone else is going through. So favorite banned book for me is Grapes of Wrath, which was banned mostly for political reasons. I actually researching for this event, it was burned in California at one point because people were so angry at how poorly it portrayed Californians about kind of the impact of poverty and injustice during kind of like the Dust Bowl. And so as an ethicist, I think we should all be talking about our political differences rather than like banning books that seem like they have political agendas. So that's an area I'm really curious about in terms of banned books and things that I like talking about, as well as, of course, I think we should be talking about poverty and workers' rights and fair treatment and all of those things. So those are kind of areas of banned books I'm really interested in. I also do some work on philosophy of peace and studying anti-violence. So I'm also really curious about the fact that a lot of banned books are banned because they are very violent. But I think that it's very possible for media to portray violence, but be anti-violent in its messaging. And I think that's really important. So I think there's a really interesting conversation there too of what violent stories do we want ourselves to be exposed to, but also how can we tell violent stories that promote peace in the way that that storytelling is taking place. So yeah, those were some of the topics I'm really interested in.
Okay, I'm going to start my timer so I don't go too long. Hi, I'm Craig Svanken. I'm an English professor, and I teach mostly American Lit, poetry, and children's lit. I was hired to do those. I sometimes do film, other things. And I'm going to try to keep this short and so I can show you some bad books. It's interesting that a lot of your favorite books from childhood are often the crux of the banned books discussions now. It wasn't always that way, but it seems more and more that people are talking about childhood, protecting children, and banned books. And this makes sense, I think, when you think about childhood, about the idea of the child, which is shared, I think, from across the political spectrum. When I teach children's lit and I teach certain books, it doesn't matter what book I teach. Somebody in the class will say that should not be given to children. And it could be coming from a left perspective or a progressive perspective or a right religious or right conservative perspective. So I teach this book, Heinrich von, my brain's gonna stop. Heinrich, what's his last name? It's called Struwwelpeter. Anybody know Struwwelpeter? And it's filled with violent images against children as warnings. It's kind of like the predecessor of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where all those children get tortured for being bad children, like chewing gum. So horrible that you should be punished with permanent disabilities, right? And but then I also get complaints about I Am Jazz, which is about from the point of view of a transgender child. And if I teach Heather Has Two Mommies, I get complaints. But also if I teach Wrinkle in Time, Wrinkle in Time is an interesting one. I had one time when I got complaints from people on the left who said, why are we reading so much religious literature? They didn't like that I did James Janeway's A Token for Children, which is from a Puritan, and I did a lot of religious literature. And then people from the right said, this is filled with magic, I can't read it. And my minister says I can't read it. Now, it's not surprising, I think, that this is going around childhood so much, because we have this concept that the children are very impressionable and need to be trained. We have this idea of didactic literature. And so children are often the kind of volleyball that people fight over in the ways they think they want to control and form the future generation. Now I'm going to say something controversial, which is we all are secret ban fans. We all want to ban some book. And this is what makes this conversation so difficult in our communities. And I came to this realization, like, would I want Mein Kampf, Hitler's Mein Kampf, taught to third graders? No, I would want Anne Frank's book, or Night by Elie Wiesel, if it was a unit on the Holocaust on Germany. But somebody might have a valid reason to teach it, I don't think to third graders, personally. So we've got to think about this, that there's these attempts to ban or censor books or self-censor coming from all over. Like Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is often on the banned books because of the use of the N-word so much. I even understand that. That's what I sympathize with, and I used to teach it all the time in American Lit, and now I'll teach a chapter or two and I give a lot of trigger warnings that it's going to be kind of traumatic. To me, the bigger problem is that Jim, a thoughtful black man, willingly goes south on the Mississippi when he could just go a little bit north and be free. And he also cedes all power to Huck. Why? I don't know. I think that's the bigger problem. That's Julius Lester's idea. Let's talk Lolita. I will never teach Lolita ever again, I don't think, because it's about the molesting of a child, really. I mean, that's the plot. I don't think that Nabokov is necessarily in favor of it, and that's really the other crux of this, which is when something's depicted, is the author in favor, is it condoning it? If I Ran the Zoo just got pulled from certain, well, first the company, Seuss's company pulled it. It does have racist imagery because it's old enough that it does. And I kind of agree with that one. It's, why have it on this, there's so many deceased books, why keep publishing it? But I don't know that I would ban it. To me, this one is the more problematic one. This was really his first children's book. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, and he himself edited it because it has the word China man, and he changes it to a Chinese man. He takes off I forget what it's called. He himself changed them from yellow to white. It's a little picture in one image. And it's an important book historically. Now, would I give it If I were a third grade teacher, I might not use it. I probably wouldn't use it. But would I ban it from the library? I probably wouldn't. Here's a personal story. Oh, I'm almost out of time. I actually got a complaint here from a Title IX complaint in one of my classes for teaching Grimm's fairy tales. Because I was teaching Grimm's fairy tales, and one of them, well, actually quite a few of them, have incest in them. They're not all about bad stepmothers. There's a bunch of them that are about horrible fathers, predatory men. And I think these were cautionary tales for young women. I think they serve their important purpose. I mean, it's not pro incest. She runs away from her father to get away from him, and that's the beginning of the story. But somebody said that I shouldn't have been teaching it, and I had to, they interviewed everybody in my class, and they hired a lawyer to investigate me. It was also because that same semester I taught this author, Phoebe Gluckner. She's on banned books, and she's a feminist graphic novelist, but her first sexual experience was when she was 15 with her mother's boyfriend. And she deals with that, but she's not, I think, condoning it. She just, she's an autobiographical graphic novelist, and I think a brilliant one. I think we're out of time, but it could be the really innocuous things like New Kid, which is just a lovely book about having racism, and I would recommend it. And there's others, there's Persephone's. The Odyssey is often on banned books. Alison Bechdel's Wonderful Fun Home, because she's gay and her father was gay, closeted. Elie Wiesel's Night. And this is a famous one because it was on, I think it was the House or the Senate, wasn't it? Lindsey Graham, who held it up and said, "Anti-racist baby, we got to ban it." So once you use certain words like, the graphic novel, he said he kept hearing, where did I put it? He kept hearing, here it is, New Kid. He kept hearing, the author is Jared Kraft. He kept hearing that it was, what's the term? The racial theory term from the law. Critical race theory. And he had to look up critical race theory because he had never heard it. He said, this is the people who wanted the ban say, this is critical race theory. I don't think half the people who say critical race theory know it. By the way, I'm going to sum up here, but because of so much children's lit being banned, I started a class. I was going to call it Banned Children's Books, but instead I called it Anti-Racist Children's Literature. If it gets offered, try to take it. It's a lot of fun, but it's not just anti-racist, it's anti-homophobic, anti-everything. Because I'm a progressive, that's my values. But when you're in my class, if you don't agree, we argue it, we talk about it, because, I don't know, we all have that banner, that little banner, I think, in our heads. And sometimes we deny that we're the banners, and we only look at the right, or people on the right, those of us on the left, as banners, but it's more complicated than that, I think. And we should think about that. That would be our question. Like, should we ban anything, or should we limit anything? All right, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Strathern. I am a lecturer in Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies, affiliate faculty over in Africana Studies, and my degree is in literature. PhD is in literature. And I've been here since 2016, and my favorite banned book is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. It is a book that has been banned because of rape and incest. It is sexually explicit, but it is also a book that, if you're going to sit down and read it, grab tissues, because it is heartbreaking what happens to Nicola Breedlove in her life and the abuse she endured. But the other piece to that book, and one of the reasons why I think it's on recent ban lists, especially 2022, is because at the foundation of it, you have this young Black girl who's being horribly abused. She lives a very, very difficult life. But in order to escape it, she thinks if she somehow comes up with blue eyes, she won't be abused anymore. Right? She won't live this life. Why? Because the story is set in 1941, and in 1941, all you saw were blonde hair, blue eyed, white little girls. And she was taught to read from Dick and Jane readers, which were all white books.
So she believes that she can somehow make those eyes blue, all of her problems will go away. And what Morrison is really getting at here is that value of being white, that someone you would never hurt a white child. Okay? So she wants to be the child. That's really the tragedy. And when Morrison would talk about the bluest eye, she would say, you know, she writes it, excuse me, she writes it in 1970, and this is a time when black women we were it, right? We were being called queens, you know. But the fact of the matter is we had so many years of not feeling that way, that we had to start to embrace that. And the bluest eye gives us what happens when we don't see our worth reflected back in the mirror. And instead we want to see our worth in, especially for black women, black little girls, we want to see our worth in black girls. So I think one of the reasons it's banned in 2022 is because of the racial aspect, but also the taglines are rape, incest, or sexually explicit, but the undertone is more about the critique of race in this country. And that's really the reason that I am very intrigued with the banning of books. Lots of folks don't want to call it banning. They want to call it challenging. They want to call it curated content. That's from the Bonds of Liberty. But I think you're right. I think there is some banning in all of us, maybe bias in all of us when it comes to literature. But at the same time, when we actively take books off of shelves, we're taking away the opportunity for folks to see themselves in places and to see themselves in a solitary way, right? And kind of process that. Especially public libraries. They have got to leave the public libraries alone. I mean, come on. So that's why I am part of this, and I am teaching Johnson's book, All Boys Aren't Blue, with my class here today, through the honors department. And it is one of the most banned books right now because it is sexually explicit, but it is also about race, gender, queerness, and the sexually explicit parts are what gets yanked out so that we then can't see all of the other pieces that are. So.
Yeah, right now the two biggest groups of books that are banned are LGBTQ, and I think you're right. Anything that seems critical of America or talks about race or racial.
Right, critical of that racial ideologies here. People saying, you know what, it's about time that we actually talked about why black folks feel the way they do. And those books get the heat up.
All right, so I think we wanted to open it up to kind of questions or a general discussion. If you have questions for one of us specifically or all of us, or any other way you want the conversation to go. Sure.
What is your guys' take on the book Fahrenheit 451? Because I know that it's a banned book, but it's also about banning books and censorship, which I think is kind of ironic, but I want to know your guys'
Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
One of my most influential books for me in my childhood. I think Ray Bradbury is responsible for me being a book hoarder. So there are bad things about that book. And I'm saying it like a joke, but I am not really joking. I don't think.
You know, we saw a picture of
You saw my
on Teams.
yeah. That was just
Your
a
office is
fraction.
like my office at home.
Yeah, that's my whole apartment. I have a 2-bedroom apartment, and 1 bedroom is just books.
Right?
Yeah, for that book, I tend to go straight to associations of like Nazi book burnings and things like that is like right where my mind goes. And I think for me personally, like childhood book bans, I think is really tricky. I have really mixed feelings about childhood book bans. But I tend to think like once you get to high school, now maybe we should have every book in every high school library and every public library, and like you were saying, just not take any off the shelves. Maybe because of reading this book, and I just think, especially when it comes to political topics, which is often what those sci-fi stories are about, suppressing knowledge, and it's almost always valuable knowledge or knowledge about a different way for society to be, right? Whether it's you're being too capitalist, you're not being capitalist enough, you're being too communist, whatever. Especially with those political issues, I tend to want to err on the side of like, let's not ban them, let's not get rid of them, let's read them, and if it's a really dumb political idea, let's talk about why it's a really dumb political idea. But we can do that without removing the book, without not letting people have access to it.
Right. Yeah, I tend to side with you too, that it's better to allow more. And I would even go much younger than most people would, because my parents just would put the adult books up on a high shelf. And that made me want to read those. So I was reading Germinal and Nana when I was very young. And I don't think it did sometimes get me in trouble. I was reading Joy of Sex when I was very young. It would get me in trouble at school a little bit, and they had to then say, okay, you can't go to school when you're in third grade and tell everybody the proper names for all the body parts. This is not acceptable. But it never harmed me as far as I could tell. I think with childhood, we're always worried about things about death. Charlotte's Web has been on the banned books list, Bridge to Therapy. We're worried about sexuality in childhood, that, how are children supposed to tell you if they're being molested unless you talk about sexuality in their body so big? The cultures that have the most incest and molestation, I would bet, are the ones that are the most repressed on those topics, not the ones that are talking about it. It depends on how you talk about it, of course. You don't have to tell a child who's not interested in how babies are made. You keep it vague, but once they're interested, I think children, we had this idea in the 20th century, starting in the 19th century, that children are like some protected class that should stay there forever. But it's very classed, and it's a very classed idea. It's for middle class and up. It's not for the vast majority of children in the history of childhood, or the vast majority of children in poor countries. They learn stuff very young. Farm kids who grew up on farms know about sexuality much younger than urban kids, right? Because they see it. So I think that's interesting. Death, sexuality, and things that are uncomfortable to talk about with your children, like the fact that Jefferson raped Sally Hemings, his slave, when she was 15, 14, and that there's a whole bunch of Jeffersons that are African American. And he also wrote the Declaration of Independence. There's something bizarre there, but better to talk about it. I don't know what my point was there. I just rambled in an interesting way for about a minute and a half.
But I think the ban right now of 451 is so interesting, because teaching that book in this time right now forces you to look at a book that imagined the destruction of knowledge, right? So it's almost like it should be one that's taught. The folks who want to get rid of it, it's like, why wouldn't you want to teach it and have folks be like, yes, we need to get rid of these books. Ray Bradbury's onto something. Let's side with him, right? I mean, it's like, where are your marketing folks? Just like keep this book on the shelf and interact with it. But I think that's also the duality of it. This is exactly what Bradbury was getting at in this very fictional, very science fiction-y world. But we're living it right now. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why it's but that also doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? It's got this real duality to it, and I think banning books, that's really the issue. It's the duality of it. But I think the removal of it is because of that critique of banning.
It's interesting that Bradbury has all books being burned, right? Just the book, idea of book. But the reality is not usually that, right, in our culture. Like if we go back to the Nazis, the first books that they burned were at that sex clinic in Berlin that helped transgender people to transition, and it was they went there first, and they burned all their books and all their notes about helping gay and transgender people. And now in Florida, the number one thing is gay and transgender books, and also the Nazis were burning any books by Jews, by communists, by gay people, right? And art. They were trying to destroy all that kind of art. If we created a society, I fear, that was completely run by me and my friends, we would ban everything that we found racist and sexist. And there's a danger to that too, I think. Not maybe as big a danger, but I think it's dangerous as well. I'm not saying these are equivalent, because ethically, you have an ethicist with us. Ethically, one is in favor of kindness and inclusion, and the other is against. But it's interesting that I think it was Langston Hughes who said all literature is ideological, but I want my ideology to be out there, not just the white supremacist ideology.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's some truth to that. Okay, somebody's...
Actually, I was going to ask, especially what everybody else thinks, because it seems like it's not about the kids at all, or maybe not even sexuality itself, but especially Fahrenheit 451, for example. I don't know exactly why that's banned, but it seems as though the most common thread between all of these is challenge to the status quo. And it seems as though it's folks trying to maintain that status quo or that ideology, at least to me, but I wonder what everybody else thinks. And especially when we compare that to banning books that have, let's say, outdated racial depictions, which can probably be problematic, but does that still match with certainly maintaining the status quo?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. The comment was made that the amount of banning books has increased in the last 5 years, 6 years. And is that quantified by anybody? I mean, has it really been?
Yeah, the American Library Association tracks it. So they're the ones that run Banned Books Week, which is one of the reasons we wanted to have this week. And so you can look at number of challenges and number of books removed.
Yeah.
And do we have statistics about what percentage there's been an increase?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, there's PEN America tracks banning books in schools, and the ALA tracks in libraries. So they're two different things, but they both show going up.
And so what's the characteristics of the banning that's occurring in the last 5 years?
So there's just a sheer number. So this says since 2021, there's a 38% increase. But if you want sheer numbers, in 2012, there were like 300 books that were challenged. And in 2022, we're getting closer to 3,000 books that were challenged.
Yeah, I looked up the PEN America one. They say that in 2022-2023 school year, because they're looking at schools, not libraries, 3,362 books were banned. That's not challenged, that was actually banned. And that's the 33% increase from the previous year, and that was similar to the year before. They also said there was 1,557 book titles, if you like numbers, and 1,480 authors and illustrators banned.
But one thing that I think is really interesting, paying attention to the role of banning or censorship within society, is like you were pointing out, is what topics do we use to start the ball rolling on banning things, right? So we start by saying we have to protect kids, or many of the bans are around LGBT content, of like, let's just not expose children to LGBT content. But then you'll notice that once there's kind of headway on that, many of these bans are in like public libraries. Right? And so when we're thinking about the status quo, I think we have to ask, like, whose status quo, or what imagined status quo, right? Because, like, gay people exist, right? And if you're a child or an adolescent or a teenager, you could meet and interact with a gay person, right? So there's also this kind of deception of, like, we should just remove all the LGBT content from schools and kids won't be exposed to it. When, of course, that's like a false image of the status quo. These are people that exist, that we should acknowledge that. And we see the same sorts of things in like online censorship. So there's been a number of recent bills concerned about like, are kids safe online? And I think you should pay really close attention to these bills, because some of them propose things like maybe kids just shouldn't have access to social media until they're 13, right? Which is incredibly problematic if you take the perspective like you do of like, we should let our kids ask questions about things and have access to information. And so it often is used as like this jumping off point into further restriction of information.
And I think with the statistics that are on the flyer that we have, the increase from 2020 to 2022, I don't think that's coincidental. We all lived through a pandemic. We all saw George Floyd be murdered on the street. So many bills, so many folks, the use of pronouns now. We're making this sort of, society is looking at things differently. And I feel like in some ways, this is a control mechanism at this point, right? Because each one of you has a phone in this room, yes? If you don't, more power to you. But you all have fun, you all have access, right? Children do have access. They will find access. Children want to find something, they're going to find it. But in this time period over these 2 years, these are the political fights. So it's not a coincidence that these are the books that are being banned at this time. It goes hand in glove.
Yeah, and it goes back to what he was saying about status quo, because if it's increased in the last 5 years, whose status is being unquote?
Some of it,
Exactly, and so, and I asked that question because I admit, because of my political position, I will be biased in what I see in the media, right? And so I see, what I don't see here on the statistics is whether there's an increase in the banning in certain parts of the country, or
Yes,
now, off the top of my head, I think I know where they're at.
well,
I think we could do some pinpoints on
Well,
some
actually,
Okay.
PEN America tracks it by state,
Okay.
and of the 3,000 that were banned, 1,406 were in Florida, 625 in Texas, then comes Mississippi, Utah, and Pennsylvania. Those are the top. Pennsylvania is 186. So it is very much, it is often it's a very organized movement right now. So it's a handful, really, I shouldn't say a handful, it's a few hundred people who are doing thousands of objections, because anybody can object to these things. And I think one of the things that shifted, and maybe you guys agree, but we used to have certain institutions that, right or wrong, that were considered, like everybody left and right admired, like a school teacher, a third grade school teacher, or your public school. But more and more on the right, there's been a kind of attempt to go after the university and now the K through 12 teachers, and that's because they see it as teaching progressive values, like let's all share, and a lot of children's literature is that, right? Let's all share. Let's not, and let's be kind to people who are different, things like that. But I think because of that ideology that's on the airwaves all the time, that like I'm a groomer, like that language of groomers, because I teach something, and that kind of anti-teacher language on the right, that's what I think probably what accounts for the spike. And I even understand it. Like, if you want to control the culture and you want to have a very banned book is what's the Canadian Margaret Atwood's book?
The Handmaid's.
If you want a Handmaid's Tale America, then of course you're going to have to get rid of things that are saying it's okay to be gay and lesbian, right? But for me, when I teach in children's lit, I always say, I use this joke. I say I've tried to make my imaginary child Arthur gay. I've been trying really hard since he was born. I got him a cravat when he was little, and I play only musicals for him. And we do. I'm using all the stereotypes about male gayness, I know, and it doesn't work. He still likes girls, and this is the fundamental misunderstanding. I think that I could talk and joke with people on the right that no matter how much ideology you try to throw at somebody, I don't think certain things are changeable that much, right? Maybe they are a little bit, but not that much. So, but people on the right really have a faith in my power to affect you guys, our power to affect you guys. They really think that we can. I always think you guys are pretty thoughtful people. You're going to accept what we say when you agree, and you're not going to accept when you don't agree. And you're going to think it out yourself. But maybe there's some truth to it, because conservative students who go to college, public schools, often move in their politics. So maybe they're right. I just think they're wrong in their ethics about how our society should be. I want a tolerant society that accepts people of all kinds of sexualities and races, and it's honest about our history. And I think some people want the Dick and Jane America with a lot of people hidden or hiding themselves.
Well, and I think that is a huge part of the banning, is that especially in school libraries, in public libraries, if you take things off of the shelf where someone can't see themselves, the erasure of who you are is very plausible, right? When they continually remove something like Fun Home or All Boys Aren't Blue off the shelves, well then we cannot have gay folk, right? Gay folk are wrong. But that's the message that they're trying to send, and it's the message that allows folks to sort of sit in that I don't belong space. And when you sit there so long, you eventually start to believe it, and you start to live that way. Whereas if you go to the library or someone gives you a book and you do see yourself, you're like, okay, I exist. At least one other person on the planet is like me, and I'm good.
Yeah, I was going to say, my sister used to be a nanny in LA, and the family she married for, the little girl Lita, I think she was 6 or 7, and she expressed to my sister that she wanted to be more than best friends with her friend. And I think if we ban books like that, where is Lita going to find people that she can relate to? You know, it was so much with racism before, and now it's with queerness. Like, if she can't see stories about people that are like her, why are we writing, or why are we doing this?
And when you have a young person like that, and you're the parent, and maybe you don't know what the hell you're doing, right? Maybe that book will help you with your child, right? Because we all know parents do not have all of the answers, right? We need help. And maybe they do go to the library and find a book that they can sit with together and talk about, and it helps that mom, that dad, that parent, right? But if that book's removed, where are the parents going to go for some help, right? You can't do those things, and that little girl may find herself in that, and she may find the language she needs to express herself, right? All of those things are being removed from that child's future.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it's her trying to express herself, you've got to, you know, if you don't see it in the media, then you feel this aloneness.
Or if you see it a certain way in the media, right? The packaging in the media is very different than someone writing an autobiography, someone creating a book like Fun Home that is a graphic novel, but it's Adele's life story, right? She gets to shape that. The author gets to shape it. Someone isn't shaping it for them, right? And when you see those two different kinds of sides, then the conversations can happen as well.
Do you think, though, that we weaken our position to be against banning when we ourselves say, either self-ban, I've self-banned, I haven't taught Phoebe Glover, and I haven't taught that fairy tale, honestly. Maybe I'll go back to it, but I'm a little bit afraid. And I've changed some of the things. Now, but that's different than banning, I guess. Self-banning is different than banning.
I think so.
But do we weaken ourselves when we on the left, those of us on the left, and I'm not assuming we're all on the left, say we should ban Huck Finn, we should ban the Little House on the Prairie books because they have racist attitudes toward Native Americans. And Injun Joe is quite racist in Tom Sawyer. I mean, there's a lot of older works that are quite racist. And do we also, that was one question I have, and the other question is, are we also maybe sometimes have a weird double standard? There was attempts to ban Woody Allen's memoir, right, from the publishing house itself, well, the publishing house itself. But Alice Walker has been, The Color Purple has been attacked from two sides. One from people who don't like the queerness of it, right? And also I've heard black men attack it because it's very, there's not really any positive black male figures in it. But then she's become quite anti-Semitic in her public statements in the last 10 or 15 years, even though I think maybe because she was married to a Jewish man. Her child identifies as Jewish and black, so it must be a weird Thanksgiving for her and her daughter if they talk. But I don't hear as much attempts to ban The Color Purple. I wouldn't be in favor of it personally.
I think there's still important differences there, though, in what counts as a ban. So for me, at least, I think of a ban as like, we're taking this book off the public library shelf. And I think there has to be a difference between calling for something to be banned and like criticizing it.
Yeah.
So Like, you know, if I see you reading, what else? There's some podcast, The Game. Does anyone remember this book? The Game, How to Date. It's like the rules for guys to like
very
get the
sexist.
girls, or like men are from Mars, women are from Venus. If I see you reading one of those books, I'm gonna go, just so you know, like there's no science in that, and also it's pretty misogynistic and sexist. I don't think you should read that. But I think there's a difference from saying, I don't think you should read that, or even, I don't want to teach it, because I don't think there's good ideas in it, and saying, we should remove it from the library. I think there's an important difference there.
There might be value in teaching something that's very offensive, though. Like I used to teach Ragged Dick by Horatio Alger, and it's got so many bad ideas. And then I found out that Alger was also probably a pedophile. He's very famous on the right. They ignore the pedophile part because it's all up by the bootstraps. Like if you're polite and hardworking, you'll do well in America. They just focus on that, not the probable pedophilia. But I stopped, once I found out that he was probably a pedophile, I thought, I don't really like this book anyway, and I'm going to stop teaching it. But it did serve an important, in the anti-racist children's lit, I start off with really racist stuff about different groups so we can see what's changed. I think historical knowledge is useful. Maybe better as you get older, maybe more useful as you get older.
I think we have a hand over here, yeah.
I think there's something really interesting in the book banning process because, like, teams love books and doing team programming around, like, we're going to read a bunch of banned books. Like, I've never had more, like, 8th through 11th graders in any, like, reading program that I've run. Oh, yeah. And I think
That sounds great to me. Do you
Yeah.
think that's a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
I think it's great, and so I've like, you know, we have really interesting conversations about like death of the author, and like, you know, and I've only been able to do like excerpts because, you know, we can't get through, but like we do like little excerpts and then like, what, you know, just how does like what comes up? Why do you think it's banned? Do you like those kinds of questions? I think are really enriching for that like age group because they like it. They, you know, like the system that's like the age.
Do they tend to be against banning in general?
Yeah. I think that, but that comes up, right? Like, okay, like, you know, we don't look at like racist depictions, but like if this was, like, how would you feel about that? Like, do you think that you would like want to be exposed to that? But I think it's like a control thing. Like, I want to choose what I consume, especially in high school where they're like really feeling out. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have other recommendations for ways that like people who work with kids or even adults can leverage the banning process to like get excited and like, you know, ways that we can say like, yeah, these books are banned, like and like the Fahrenheit 451, like this book is banned, what a wild thing, you gotta read it so you can see the irony and like other like tactics that we can use.
I mean, I love the idea of banned book clubs. Throw that one out there. I don't know if saying, you know, if saying read these banned books. I think it's hard for me to say that reading banned books is the way to go to try to get kids into literature. Because I think sometimes when we look at banned books and we look at why they're banned, if you're not equipped to have conversations with the folks around you who are reading the literature, it can really backfire, right? I mean, you have to be comfortable in these things. Right now I'm teaching All Boys Are Blue, and I am not queer. So there are things in there that don't resonate with me. My daughter is, but I'm Black. So when Johnson says some different things in there that are just kind of little sentences about being Black, I'm like, oh hell yeah, I've been there, done that. But some of the other sides of his identity, his queer side, I'm learning to do that. So I'm very upfront about things that I don't know firsthand, things that I don't know enough about, and I want folks to tell me what I don't know. So I think just to have a banned book, just to read a banned book, can totally backfire. But if you're ready to have conversations, you're ready to learn from the folks that are reading the book with you, then it's perfect. It's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for folks to think. right? And to actually put themselves in a different space. And, you know, with Mark Twain, bless his Missouri heart, you know, he does use the N-word. And I'm not a fan, you know, I'm not a fan of the word. But it is there, and it's like, why is it there? That was the time. That was what people said in casual conversations, right? It was a word that was just used, and now it's not. And we have to think about why. Where did it come from? Why was it okay? Why is it not okay now? Why are variations okay if we're talking about NWA and not okay in other spaces? Like, we have to have the tough conversations. So when you read a banned book, be prepared to get down and dirty, right? And if you're not, don't sign.
I think that's right. I think always teaching the controversy is good, and always talking about it is good, to me, almost always. Like, I once was teaching here on campus, The Great Gatsby, and there's this little section at the beginning of The Great Gatsby. I always teach with passing, by the way, because they're both passing, you know, interestingly. But anyway, The Great Gatsby has this part where they're referencing all these racist works that, what's his name? Daisy Buchanan's husband, what's his name, is reading, and he's totally white supremacist. And Fitzgerald was borrowing from actual white supremacist stuff. And then one student in the class said, but aren't white people better? And the whole class, this was not a freshman class, this was a junior class. The whole class was silent. And I said, how? Better how? Like, you mean like at bad dancing, like that? Is that what you mean? I made a joke just to see if he just had misspoken. And he said, no, like the bell curve. And then my whole class had to stop for me to talk about how misunderstood the bell curve book is, how bad it is really in many ways. You know, what difference does it make if there's a little bit of differentiation? All the women in this class probably developed linguistic ability a little bit faster than men in this group. But what does that tell us? And probably not all of you, probably some of you. So these statistical differences are so minor, and plus almost completely can be explained by sociological or testing methods, right? You know, if I design an IQ test, this is the IQ test thing. So anyway, I talked about that for a while, and then he said, I understand now. I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought I had a virulent racist in the class. I think I was just somebody who had gotten really bad information from people and was being honest enough to say it. I'd rather they say it so you could talk about it than not say it. But I think, and so that's what I would do, is I would use it as an opportunity. I think sometimes there's students who will just emulate whatever I say, and then I don't really think anybody's learning anything from that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think when I lead courses on that stuff, as a leader of the discussion, what you want to be aware of is almost some modelings of metacognition and meta-commentary of what I think is problematic about censorship and problematic about banned books, is I think it's a bad way to do politics, to say, let's just not talk about that idea. I think it's a bad way to talk about racism, to say, just don't talk about racism. It's a bad way to talk about violence, to say, let's not read accounts of survivors of violence, right? So part of what you're doing when you read a banned book is hopefully modeling what is the right way to talk about racism? How do you approach it carefully and charitably and pause about what's going on? What is the right way to talk about violence in our society and victims of violence in our society? And so kind of be aware that you're trying to model what that proper conversational process is, as well as being really aware of what is it like to learn from people whose experiences are really, really different from yours. So another of my favorite banned books that I've read is The Things They Carried, which is written by, Tim O'Brien, who was a survivor of the Vietnam War, and writes about being in war. I have no idea what it's like to be in a war. I was really haunted by some of those passages, very upset. It's usually banned for being too graphic, offensive, too violent, right? I think it's a really powerful anti-war book, right? And so part of this is, okay, how do I approach this subject, trying to listen openly and charitably to something that I have no experience with? And that's the same approach I want to take to books on racism, right? Because my world, my status quo is not going to include exposure to racism the same way it would if my skin color was different. So I think you get to model those things in the discussions, and that's what's really cool. It's like, here's the better way to do it, kind of.
Do you know when that book was banned?
The things they carried?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I was taught it in high school. That was
Yeah. So book bannings, as we mentioned, have really moved towards kids' books, LGBT. Banning stuff for political reasons is not as cool now. It used to be cool to hate on communism and be like, you gotta support war, you gotta support capitalism. And so we can't read Grapes Around things they carried. It's kind of shifted.
It used to be just
But-
bad words like.
Or they
Catcher-
just curse throughout.
Yeah, Catcher in the Rye was a huge banned book. I think just for.
Yeah, so I think reasons for book bans have shifted, and we're a little bit right now in a like, let's protect the children from LGBTQ issues rather than just kind of graphic violence or obscenity, which I think was more common previously.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know the year off the top of my head. Yeah.
One thing that troubles me about some of the ways of framing this is like saying that the bluest eye is a book about racism. Looking at race in that book, and race is constructed.
Yeah.
And like, why don't we see, or the same with race and gender are these oppressive categories made up. And so this book, Danny locates those issues within those authors. What happens with whiteness and masculinity escapes free of charge. So I just, Dr. Smith, you said at one point, like, children exposed, use the word exposed, and that troubled me. When you were framing as if being queer is something you can be exposed to.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out. And I think everyday queer people are exposed to straightness constantly.
Of course. Yeah.
So there's just some things today in the conversation I feel like we're just kind of missing some larger marks about who, and innocence, childhood innocence is, that's a privilege to me of like whiteness and straightness. It's kind of like, it's kind of crap if you survived in the United States, slavery and all sorts of other things.
Right.
Fuck innocence. What? You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's
to be shocked by books being banned is also like, where have you been the last 100 years in the country? I'm just, so sorry, I'm just kind of got worked up here about some things, but.
No, it's a long history of, I mean, look, the library in Egypt that had all those books, Alexandria, right, was burned. I mean, this is I would say it's always ideological, right? Almost always, at least. Or always, and even when the idea of protecting children is a very ideological thing, as you say, which is only protecting certain children, and it's a pretty contemporary idea too, because that idea of childhood doesn't really start until the Romantics, right? And that's because they're wealthy enough that they can have this longer extended childhood, plus longer life span, other things. But so you're right. The discussions are always external. We sometimes talk about the banned book, but you're right. It's the culture. So Althusser would agree with you.
Like George's book is less about him, and it's banned because of others. It's got nothing to do with what George, that's the way I see it. So when like teenagers, when they read banned books, it's important that we don't locate the difficulty or whatever within those books, the difficulty with the banners.
Yeah, with the
They're
social
the ones
reaction
who
to it.
created
Absolutely.
this. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, no, I think you're absolutely right, and excuse me, one of the things that, especially with something like the Bluest Eye, is that in looking at Nicola Breedlove as someone who is thinking whiteness will save her, that does, at least I hope, and when I've taught it before, for me it's like, okay, why would she even think that way, right? It does call into question those larger systems, right? We have to look at why someone thinks that would save them from a parent who is so deeply troubled that they're raping her daughter. She thinks that's going to save her from her home. But it also then opens up questions, excuse me, about how we do internalize whiteness. Like, white is better, right? I mean, rolls off the tongue very easily for a lot of folks without thinking about it, right? How did we get to this place? And we do have to call into question, when we look at racism, we are looking at, for me, it's black folks. But we have to look at the systems that create those spaces. And I think books like, so many of the books that are banned do critique those spaces and give you a way to critique them, right? Especially like Johnson's book, like he's using very personal pieces of his life. Going to school and getting to play Abe Lincoln, we talked about this in class, I'm like, how are you gonna have a black kid play Abe Lincoln? Go ahead. But critiquing that, right? He's saying, everybody thought, you know, Abe Lincoln was cat's meow, and we quickly learned that he's not, or was not, right? Questioning that, it opens up the ability to have those conversations and questioning those things.
We have time for about one more sort of circle of response or question.
Already talked, so I don't know. I think I do want to maybe like advocate for like the word and the idea of exposure. You know, like I understand that there's charge there that's painful, and like that's kind of like in a like we're cooked in whiteness, we're cooked in patriarchy, we're cooked in cishet normativity, and it's like exposure is what I can point to finding out who I am, you know, and it's like I didn't have the luxury of being born directly into a community and environment that was like, this is what non-binary is, this is why you feel this way. It took a really long time, and I'm really glad that like there's so much more access. Like my journey would have been so much less fraught if I had any kind of educators around me who were modeling it, if I had any books that I could read that like exposed me to these ideas. Yeah, like my relationship with anti-racist education is exposure, is like reading and learning. And so I think I do just want to like fight for that word, because I think that it can be weaponized, but I have so much love for it, you know, because it is shocking, but shock is sometimes good, I think, you know, and I think that there is something good there around that, like, yeah, just like having your eyes blown open, because it's not always immediate, depending on our conditioning in those ways.
Yeah, to kind of add on to that a little bit, I really struggled with every aspect of my identity growing up. I'm non-binary, I'm queer, I'm disabled, and I'm mixed. So it was really hard for me to figure out who I am and kind of label that. And I don't even use labels for anything today, but just having access to all of this information and all of these books and all of this stuff online really helped me figure out, oh, this is why I feel this way, I'm non-binary, or this is why I feel this way because I'm queer. And it really made me feel like I wasn't alone, and it made me feel kind of proud to be myself, because there's a lot of shame and guilt that comes with hiding who you are. And it really impacted my mental health for a very, very long time. And thankfully, I'm in a very good spot now. And it's just all part of this journey, and it's important to recognize how access to these information, these books that are banned is really wrong, because these people who need them can't have them.
Well, thanks everybody so much for being here today. Let's give a round of applause to each other. If you wanted to continue the conversation here, we've got the space till 1, so feel free to bow for self-institute. If you wanted to get in touch with the professors here today, the contact information is on our website, dfi.org, that's dfi.org. And I wanted to mention also the author of the second book on the Spanish Ghost is coming to speak with us in November on November 7th. And I'll have to join us there. You can find out that information on the website, again, that's dfi.org. And
Who's the author?
don't be too don't be surprised if your phone starts ringing like that.
Thanks for the extra warning.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
I have to say what my favorite kind of book was. Oh, wow. There's too many of them.
Yeah, that's there's too many. There's way too many.
Weetie Bat's pretty great.
This is so good. I brought my high school copy.
Oh, nice.
Right?
Oh, nice.
I could not bring my books die because it's in pieces.
Yeah.
At my house.
I almost bought the
Hey, absolutely amazing. Yes, I did. I have